Bill took me by the scenic route to approach Hamilton, Ontario. Anyone who's been to Hamilton, Ontario will appreciate the importance of that. We drove in, we got our landed immigrant status easily, no longer the case, and cleared, we were landed, as they say, and cleared immigration in Windsor, Ontario, and then drove across southern Ontario. We heard on the radio news that a gas station had been robbed, and we thought, oh no, it's just like Chicago. And we drove a little further, and the news came on in the next hour, and it said, the thieves have been apprehended and the money has been returned. And we thought, this is going to be better than Chicago. And approached McMaster from the west. It was quite lovely, and only later, because the campus is really quite beautiful. It's designed to be a campus. It has pleasant green spaces between brick buildings and stone buildings. And it was quite a contrast to approaching along the, I think it's the Queen Elizabeth Way from Niagara Falls, where you saw for many, many years nothing but steel mills. Those are now mostly closed now, so perhaps it will all be rehabilitated. It was quite a smoggy city, but we settled in the countryside outside of Hamilton in our early years there. Initially in Ancaster, Ontario, where we rented a little cottage on a farm and had access to horses to ride, and it was quite a lovely place to have a baby. Sean's first few years were lived there, and Bill began to work in what was then the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at McMaster. And his main mentor there, and mine as well, was David Counts. And David was a veteran of fieldwork in New Britain, and Dorothy had accompanied him and done her own fieldwork and had her PhD in anthropology as well, Southern Illinois, I think, and she was teaching at the University of Waterloo. They lent us their house initially, so we had about a month there before we found a place to live, and introduced us to the Association for Social Anthropology in Oceania, which was very important to me. The first few years at McMaster, I stayed home with our little boy, and Bill began his teaching career. He was teaching mostly in religion, magic, and witchcraft, political anthropology. The department separated into a sociology department and an anthropology department. I'm not exactly sure when that happened, but by the time I was ready to begin taking graduate courses, they were just an anthropology department. David was the head of it for many years. Dick Preston was the head of it for many years and would remember the chronology far better than I do. Dick Slobodin was there. He was writing his book on W.H.R. Rivers, who, of course, had done a lot of research on depopulation in the Pacific Islands. David Damas was there, who had done research in Micronesia and in the Arctic. What did he say? He burned down his igloo and froze his whiskey. So he decided to do research in the Pacific for a while. It was a lovely group of mentors for me, and Dick Preston and Dick Slobodin were co-teaching a history of the theory of anthropology course in 1976. I think it was 1974. I think it was in the fall, and I asked, as I had asked Sir Raymond Firth, can I take your course? I was at that time a faculty wife, so there were these nepotistic concerns. So they too asked me a bunch of skill testing questions. I can't remember a single one of them. And they decided that they would let me take the course. I then, on the strength of my performance in that course, which fortunately was good, I applied to go as a part-time student in the master's program. I then finished it in 2 years and thought, I really should have just gone full-time, because I could have been a teaching assistant, and it was silly. But I did it all on a part-time basis for the master's degree. While I was a graduate student there, my supervisor was Matthew Cooper, who had done fieldwork in Malaita in Solomon Islands. And I became concerned about what would I write my thesis on, because it was expected at the time that one do fieldwork for a master's thesis, but there was very limited funding to do fieldwork for a master's thesis. So it made sense to pick a master's thesis topic on something that you could afford to travel to and do the fieldwork on, or where you could attach to a professor's grant. And neither of those made sense to me, because while I had been helping out with Bill's fieldwork in 1969 to 71, I had been observing and taking notes for myself, and that we shared, on the women's side of the graded society, which is the hierarchy of ranks achieved through the slaughter and exchange of pigs. The men's society was the focus of Bill's research, and there's a nice diagram in his dissertation, and I believe I used it again in my dissertation, which shows the progression through the ranks that men follow, from the killing of a few piglets up to the killing of 10 tusked boars with tusks, and I cannot describe tusked pigs without doing this, with tusks that make a full circle. The pigs are raised they're very domesticated. They're raised to produce these tusks. There are certain sows that produce intersex pigs, which produce tusks. The intersex pigs are tuskers, although their genitalia appears more female than male. They have tusks. So they're very much sought after and require a careful breeding program. Male, not intersex, tusked pigs are also hand-raised. They can be castrated or not castrated. They're different names, and their upper canines are knocked out in the old days with a stone, and then they're hand-fed because their mouths are sore, and as their teeth grow, they don't want to risk the breakage. And with hand feeding, they will grow pigs and then tusks that have a name for each gradation. So the little tooth like this is a tevi, and then a half circle is something else, and a full circle is an ala. I think a half circle is a mambu, ala, and so on. And there are gradations within those. People really know their pigs. They have a bunch of words for the bodies of the pigs, but the real focus in Vanuatu is on the tusks. The men are the primary focus of the graded society, and they achieve a rise in rank not just by raising their own pigs. It's key to be able to raise your own pigs, because the way they rise in rank is by exchanging pigs. Melanesia is all about reciprocity, right? Delayed reciprocity. So I raise a pig, I donate it to your ceremony, you kill my pig, you give a speech saying thank you very much, and then when I let you know that I'm going to kill pigs, you show up with a pig that's better. A lot better if it's been a long time, a little better if it was last week. And that's how the cycle continues. So it's a system of investment. It has a notion of interest. It has the notions of obligations to receive. Sometimes somebody shows up with a pig that you weren't expecting, and you have to receive it. And then you have to repay it. So financial management is a huge undercurrent of a successful career in the graded society. It doesn't necessarily mean that if you are successful at rising through the graded society that you will become a leader. And it's a necessary prerequisite, or it was at that time. We can talk more about that later. It was necessary at the time to be at least a mambu rank, which was very near the top, just sort of one cycle short of the top of the hierarchy, in order to be a man of influence or a ratihigi, or leader in these communities. It still meant that you were a big man in the classic sense. That is, it wasn't because of who you were, what your rank was, that people listened to you, but because of how you behaved, what your fashion was, what your character was, how well you were able to mediate disputes, how well you were able to protect and support the people under you. If there was a hurricane, could you look after them? Until the end of warfare in the 30s, the leader also could command warriors, and I'll talk more about that in a later part of this. But so men primarily have been the focus of pig exchanges, the greatest society, and leadership. And women also kill pigs, and that was what interested me. They begin with pigs, as the boys do. So boys, like 10-year-olds, kill pigs, and girls who are sometimes in arms kill pigs, technically a challenge. And then they kill pigs on the eve of their weddings as well. They don't take as many ranks as the men do, and they don't become or haven't become leaders. This is very slowly changing in Vanuatu. The ceremonies that I observed while I was on that first period of fieldwork became the field notes to support my master's thesis, which was on Durée. And Durée is a women's system of grades or ranks in the hierarchy. Durée is also the name for a female pig. So women are given female pigs by their fathers, usually, to kill. And if a woman takes a second or third rank, she'll be given one tusked pig to kill. And usually a tusked pig, or sometimes more than one when she gets married, which are part of the bride wealth exchanges. The most unusual women's pig killing that I watched was one in which the father he was a very wealthy man who had taken rank in the graded society. I believe he was he might have been a mambu rank or the one just below that. But he was a very successful entrepreneur. He had a trade store. He bought coconuts, copra from people. A really good businessman. He had a motorboat. He had a truck. He's still a very good businessman. And he achieved the name of Master Joe, which was the name they used for the white planters and trade store people, but he never achieved the status of ratihigi, or leader. So he was widely respected in the realm that people believed he was good at, which was business, not respected at all for his abilities as a leader. And he had a pig killing for, I think it was 2, maybe 3 of his daughters simultaneously, which was pretty impressive, at the same time as he was taking a rank in the male society. And this is the unusual part, he had his littlest daughter in his arm, and he had a rifle with his hand on the trigger figure, and it has his daughter on his right hip, the rifle in his right arm, balancing the end of the rifle with his left hand, going down the line, shooting pigs. And he had a string from the trigger to the little girl's hand. Why nobody died, I will never know. I mean, only the pig died, which was good. And his bigger girls were allowed to whack at the animals with little axes, which was actually just awful because it took the big animals a long time to die. And they were finally, I think, finished off by adult men. But never mind. And the meat became, it was cooked, they were always cooked in earth ovens overnight while we danced overnight. Bolo was the dance for the women, and Savagoro was the man's dance to celebrate a man killing pigs. And then in the morning, usually late morning, the earth oven would be opened up and the food would be shared out. People didn't sit all together and eat. They would take a packet of food and either take it over to their family group on the sidelines and eat it, or take it home. And in general, women ate with the women and children, and men ate with men. But food was only later spread out on banana leaves and shared in a kind of Western style array of food on leaves, but you mustn't step over the leaf. That was a really big taboo. And then dogs would do that, and everybody got upset. So taking it home was actually quite a handy way to do it. I used the material from that pig killing and a few others featuring women at weddings to write a dissertation, which was in 1976 at McMaster, and it was called Spheres of Exchange in a Northern New Hebridean Society. And I used I think it was Bohannon's concept of spheres of exchange developed in Africa to look at the flow of the goods. I wasn't so interested, well, the ceremonies were interesting, but the focus of the thesis was on how goods flowed in and between spheres of exchange in that society. So pigs flowed through a cycle of pig exchanges that I've just described briefly. Some of them left the island. People from the neighboring islands would come with pigs and boats and leave the pigs and go home, and then people from our island would go to their ceremonies taking pigs in boats. Pigs went in trucks too to other places. So there was quite a wide range, and I think a long history pre-contact of trading pigs, which of course is good for the breeding stock, between the islands. And then those pigs would actually be exchanged for mats in some of these ceremonies, the pig killing ceremonies and the weddings. And somehow people kept track of who brought exactly what, like which pig, which mat. Sometimes I could not see a lot of difference. I suppose if I'd raised the pig, I would know. But the mats especially, it was baffling to me that they could keep track of this. And they did it with nothing. By the time we arrived in the late 60s, early 70s, they had notebooks. But still, a lot of the account keeping was done using a muele leaf, which is a palm leaf. And they would just notch the leaf and remember it was a mnemonic device, remember through the notches who had given what. Because not only did they have to remember long-term for the pig exchanges, they had to remember short-term for anything that came to a wedding. So the bride's kin would bring pigs, mats, blankets, saucepans, lop, which is a taro pudding, and so on, and sewing machines, and cover everything with baby powder to bless the bride, shortwave radios, and they had to keep track of everything. And then the groom's kin would bring similar things, and everyone who brought a gift got a gift before they left, and it couldn't be the gift they came with. It was amazing. I was very impressed with people's bookkeeping in their heads, mental math ability, I guess, and just their sense of social propriety and etiquette. Those ceremonies were the moments when goods flowed from one sphere of exchange to the other. So pigs were exchanged for mats. Blankets could be exchanged for mats or pigs, but mostly mats. Money, they had $2 bills at the time, Australian currency, and I can't tell you how many French francs would have been, 200 French francs, some trivial sum today, but it was similar to $2 Australian at the time. And paper money would be exchanged, and I had a whole list of conversions between mats, pigs, Australian currency, French francs, and food. So that was the gist of that little thesis. It was quite short, but it looked some at the status of women, because the truth of it was that it just increased their prestige as an object of exchange themselves, and showed that their family loved them. So it was a way of honoring, tambe, honoring a girl. And few girls were, most girls were honored at their wedding, but few girls were honored with being given a pig to kill and taking a name. When a man or woman killed a pig, they took a new name. So women who had names in the pig killing hierarchy were, they stood out in the society, I guess, as having achieved something or been given something that was special. but they still were very much the property of their men. And the speeches at the weddings would admonish their husbands to treat them well, not to beat them. And there was some intervention if a wife was beaten. I can remember one night seeing coconut torches going through the coconut plantation behind us as an angry father came to confront his son-in-law about beating the daughter. But beyond that, the status of women was really low. That's all I can say. It was a matrilineal society, but by no means a matriarchy. And so all of those things worked their way into that dissertation. I went from there to continue my graduate studies as a PhD student, and I had the sense to go full-time for that project and to apply to the Social Science and Research Council for a doctoral fellowship, and I was successful in getting that. Doctoral fellowships at that time allowed you to also have a teaching assistantship, and they paid, boy, these were the days, they paid for the whole family to go do fieldwork, my dissertation fieldwork. So my coursework was done at McMaster in 70. I received my master's in 76. So I did a year of coursework and then a year of comprehensive examinations, and embarked on fieldwork in 1978, I think. I have to cheat. Yes, June of 1978. The coursework I'll just talk about for a little bit. I did a lot of work with David Counts on theory and methods, and Dick Preston. They were probably the two who influenced my work the most. Dick for his work on symbolic anthropology, and Edward Sapir, and phenomenology, and just how to look and how to see. And David for his deep knowledge of Melanesia and fieldwork, the practicalities of fieldwork, how to make contacts with people and do interviews and store your film so it didn't rot, and what kind of anti-malarials to use, and these sorts of things. David introduced me at the time that I was finishing my master's research. He introduced me to the annual conference of the Association for Social Anthropology in Oceania, quite a mouthful, known as ASAO. And Bill and I went with David and Dorothy to Charleston, South Carolina. And David had persuaded me, I well remember the conversation, that even though I was just a master's student, I should organize a working session. They had they still do have 3 levels of sessions at ASAO. An informal session where you just talk about idea. I have an idea for a session. A working session in which you bring a 20-minute summary of what it is you would like to write a paper about, and you all you exchange those and you talk about it. And then a symposium where you read each other's papers and critique them. And it's a very appealing way of creating an integrated volume for publication. David says, okay, my nickname at the time was Margie. He said, Margie, you gotta, and he has this Mississippi accent, you gotta do a session in Charleston at the ASAO. Because, you could write a book about your experiences already in Vanuatu. And he thought that what would be of interest was something on the end of warfare in the Pacific Islands. ASAO had several monographs by that time. I can't remember what number this one was, 7. So by then, I guess they had 6 monographs on various aspects of Pacific Island societies. They had written about adoption a couple of times and various other things. But nothing on the cessation of indigenous warfare. And this was a hot topic even in the 70s in Papua New Guinea, because it was clear that pacification, that is the end of warfare in order to impose another form of governmental control, was used during the Vietnam War as well, right? It's disarming the locals in another parlance. But it was clear that in Papua New Guinea, pacification was not complete. And even then, there were outbreaks of violence and what became known as rascalism, a rascal phenomenon. So why was that happening in New Guinea? Why did it seem not to be happening in the Solomons? Of course, later they had a major insurrection, but that could be arguably in fact, the Bougainville insurrection had, I believe, started by the time we were doing this. But it was possible to see that as something different and separate. Shoot, I'm so sorry. To see that as something, it was possible to see the insurrection in the Solomon Islands as something separate and different to what was happening in Papua New Guinea, which was more a continuation of warfare. So David is a very persuasive guy, and it sounded like fun to go to Charleston. It was February, and we were living in southern Ontario. And indeed it was. And we called together a really interesting group of people there.